Hello, welcome to the Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Age of Sigmar Stat Center. I'm joined by the Twitch chat, as you can see here, where we record the Stat Center every Monday, 11 AM BST. Today, I'm going to be going through the event results from the weekend like I normally do, but today is slightly different. And that's because we have just had a new General's Handbook, which is the, well, it was 6 month, but yearly now, book for our missions and how to play Age of Sigmar. The last one was 6 months long. The new one is 12 months long, which is pretty exciting. Now, none of the events that happened at the weekend, apart from one, were using the new GHB. We also, last week, had a battle scroll update as well, where we saw massive changes to things like coherency and also lookout sir rule, as well as some nominal point changes. So today's show will be a little bit different to the shows that I normally do through every Monday. Normally, I use the Monday show for myself and the chat. We hang out together to talk about the lists that are currently playing in the current meta of the game, and we talk about what we like about them, how they play, what's happening with them, and we shout out the people who've done really well at those events with those armies. Now, there were loads of people playing this weekend. In fact, there were 438 people playing Age of Sigmar this weekend, which is great, over 8 countries. But only one of the events used the new GHB, new battle scroll, and new points, so that's the one we're going to be talking about. It just happens to be the event that I ran. I also live streamed that event this weekend as well on the T Sports Network, so you can go and watch some of those games. And I also recorded several of those games, which are videos I will post later in the week. So if you would like to see the most relevant and up-to-date GHB stuff, then this, I guess, will be the show where I'm going to talk about those things, and will always be the show where I'll talk about those things. I hope everyone who attended an event this weekend had a wonderful time. I'm going to shout all those events out now, but I'm not going to go through all those lists because I'd just be going through lists that don't maybe make sense or aren't relevant, but they might be as well, but it's just a task that doesn't need doing. So I hope that makes lots of sense. Now, the biggest event that we had this weekend was the Ace Grand Tournament with 118 players that happened in France. Hope you all had a wonderful time. They had the Kislev Grand Tournament. Tried to guess where it was. It was in Italy and had 71 players. We had the Onslaught event in Scotland with 42 players. Shout out to everyone in Scotland. The Salt City GT over in the USA with 33 players. The Crossroads Carnage this weekend with 32 players. We had the Mile High Open with 29 players in the USA. At least we tried 28 people in Germany. And the Bash by the Billabong, number 3, the third Bash by the Billabong, with 24 players in Australia. Blood and Thunder GT in Canada with 19 players, and the Shropshire Slaughter in England with 18 players, which is really fun. There's also another really interesting stat that we should talk about before we get on to looking at the event from the weekend, and this is because we've had 11,500 players in events, over 318 events over the last year of Age of Sigmar, which, compared to the previous year, has almost doubled, which is amazing. So if you're into the game and you're excited by Age of Sigmar, knowing that the event number has doubled is crazy. That's a lot of people. And it means Age of Sigmar, and my experience of Age of Sigmar as well, is it's growing a lot. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute is the Age of Sigmar culture, and that's developing at a phenomenal pace and is really worth talking about. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So that's all of my stuff. As always, I'm joined by the Twitch chat and supported by everyone on the Wargamer Patreon. So thank you to all of you. Let's go look at some... Let's talk about some Age of Sigmar now. Armies and all the other stuff. Let's go. So before I talk about the armies, I'd like to just talk about the way these armies have put in into BCP. And I would like to shout out Tomo, Gareth, over from the Old Town Throwdown. So a couple of months ago on the Stat Center, we covered the fact that what he did was he kept notes on his army list when he submitted his army list, so players would have a more helpful read through of his army list, and also maybe for himself, I'm not sure, but it was something that I was super impressed by, and we talked about on the Stat Center. Now, I'm not sure if Peter, who I'm about to talk about, remembered this, or Paul, who also did the same thing, but if we look and just take a moment before we talk about what's in their lists, they did do some fun stuff, like Peter's list says anti-magic dog walk, and he says that he's got 0 wizards and proud, which is fun. But if you look at when he takes notes for his army, it tells you what the stuff does. He's got Grand Strategy, which is Slaughter of Sorcery, and it says that there are no wizards at the end. His sub-faction is Reapers of Vengeance, and that's +1 to hit heroes and extra blood tithe point on a hero kill. So he made a very small like note for each one of the things. For instance, he's got players, blood sacrifice. That does D3 mortal wounds and generates a blood tithe point. And that's just really, really handy, because if you're just using that to constantly look at your opponent's list or look at what his abilities do, like, he hasn't hidden any information. In fact, he's been more upfront with information than I think we as a culture, Age of Sigmar tournament gaming as a culture, necessarily do all the time. And it's lovely to see. And again, first person I ever saw do this was Gareth, so I want to shout him out. But it's lovely to see Peter having done this, and then Paul also having done this as well. In fact, there was a round 4, they ended up playing each other on the stream. We turned their audio on as well. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And what they did, it just sounded like they had a very, very good, friendly, fun game of Age of Sigmar. And I'm going to talk about that part in a second. But just for the list stage, I think it's super worth talking about that this is really nice to see done. Obviously, some people aren't going to do it. Like, it requires a little extra step and requires you to do more work. And so it's not going to be something that everyone does. But I just think it's really awesome that they both did it. And I want to thank them as the TO, but also as the person who does the Stat Center every Monday. I also think it's really nice to see. I imagine as an opponent, this feels like it's a really really healthy way of, you get drawn against someone and it says, oh, you're going to play this guy after lunch, and you're like, oh god, he's got Spell of Haunchy, and then you have to go find out what it does. And also, because Games Workshop effectively paywalls rules, unless you had bought the Seraphon book, then you wouldn't know what that did unless you went on something like Warhapedia. And while I'm a huge fan of Warhapedia, and I think it's great that all the rules are free, and I think rules should be free, because I think it helps sell Games Workshop's minis, which is their mission statement. They're a miniatures company. I think the rules being free would be good. You know, Warhapedia is a resource that I guess technically shouldn't exist. Games Workshop have said that they don't want the rules to be free. So this is, again, a really nice way as a player to help, you know, show your opponent what's happening, which I think is great. The kind of opposite of this, and I'm not sure if it's the opposite, but another version of this, which is maybe not as helpful but is definitely funny, is from my good friend Toby. Now, Toby, for the entire weekend, was wearing a spider on his head because he was the spider-ridden and not a spider rider. And as you can see in his list, he has lots of spider riders and all sorts of other stuff. Also got Scragrot. Now, he's also named all of his units as well. So Kragnos isn't Kragnos, it's actually Stiznab, for example. And his Scuttleboss and Gigantic Spider is Zonkgaz, which is important, right? This is definitely interesting as an addition. But my favourite part was he then also in his list decided to add the additional note of the story of his army. And while we're not going to go through Toby's list in detail, although having only had one GHB event in the world, this does make Toby the most successful Scuttleboss and also a Scuttleboss player in the world. Let's read his story because I think it's fun. Because a lot of people say about Age of Sigmar tournament players, or tournament players generally, that they are not, like, that they're just into it for numbers and maths. But this weekend I saw a man with a spider on his head play with loads of spiders, and he had a story. After their last victory against the Fire Slayers and the great number of Grimwrath Berserkers, Spizglub fell down a hole and went on his own adventure. During this time he met an unnaturally old Grot, and after a mighty match of riddles in the dark, both Grots cheated, Spizglub found Nibbler's Itty Ring. He kept this secret from the Grots when he returned, but they knew there was something off about him. ... And then he's just got loads of spider riders. He had an additional spare spider that you could wear on your hat. If you were jealous that he was wearing a spider, he brought a spider for you as well. And there was also a spider ring, which is fun. So I just wanted to point that out, that what I saw from this weekend was 2 additional bonus cultural points, which I thought was great. It was a competitive Age of Sigmar tournament where people were playing to win, and there was a captain of Team Wales was here, for example. You had like players who are very good. Dom's a really great player. Rob's a really good player. Paul's a really great player. So you had some really great players at the event. But you also had, and Toby does really well as well, you have players that are having fun and writing stories, and you have players who are making notes to help themselves and help their opponents. And I think as a culture, I'm really proud to see that happening. And I'm happy that I talked about the last time I saw that happening, and I hope this conversation means that I see it happen more in the future, because it's awesome, and I think you're funny and great. So congratulations to all of you. Thanks for being so great. And the last bit we're going to talk about before we talk about the list is the culture of the event. Now, obviously, I was a TO, but what I wanted to say to the players who attended the event, a special thank you from me to you, was that you did amazingly in not only in like instilling with me the confidence that the Age of Sigmar culture is getting better, not that it was ever in a bad place, but it's getting better, but also in addition to that, that it's inspiring me as a gamer on a personal level to do better. And the reason I'm talking about it is I'm hoping that people listening to this show also take that on board as well, because the atmosphere was great, which was good, but also people were playing with amazing spirits. In fact, if you go back and watch any of the stream games, every time I turned the audio on, the players were saying, hey, by the way, don't forget I do this, hey, don't forget that, which I think was really important. And I think being clear on the tabletop, not attempting any gotchas, not that I've ever really seen that in Age of Sigmar anyway, apart from Worlds, is really good and really healthy, and it made for a better event. The point I wanted to talk about was, though, is I also made chess clocks mandatory on every single table. Now, there were a bunch of people. I just talked about someone who wrote a whole story for his army. There were loads of people with silly hats. There was more than one hat. In fact, there was a best hat competition. Shout out to Dan for winning it. There was a best hat competition, but I had clocks being mandatory. I think clocks are really healthy, and they make the culture of Age of Sigmar tournament gaming much better. So I'd like to see that from everyone who holds events in the future, and I think that would be really good, because I think that's also important as well. And the last bit I think I'd like to talk about is we also use terrain maps at the event. So I put terrain maps out on every table. I actually provided cards for everyone on every table to put the terrain maps out. Those terrain maps are free on the honestwargamer.com/terrain. So if you also would like to play with terrain maps, and you could use them in your friendly games at home as well, obviously, those are again free and available online. There probably will be a second version of these that go up, so that there's an A and B. So if they want, someone can choose between one of the two to make it more fun. But the GHB only came out this weekend, so I'm going to give myself some time to make that. So that's kind of the things I'd like to talk about. And the reason I think it's really important to mention in the stat show, or just in an Age of Sigmar show in general, is I wasn't responsible for people changing their lists and making them better. I wasn't responsible for people having really good table etiquette and being super healthy, which was all on them. I wasn't responsible for them like bringing their tokens and items or having good on-table etiquette, and I didn't hear any complaints or anything like that about clocks. So what I saw was a really healthy community of wargamers play competitive Warhammer really, really well. And I'd just like to say thank you to them, but also I'd like to say it's great seeing that culture develop. And I'm sure that's true in the USA. USA's got an amazing culture. You've got everyone from Tough Crowd, Wicked Dicey, and all those other people. They've got a really great culture. When I was in Australia, same thing. When I've been in Sweden, same thing. And that's true in lots of different places as well. It's nice seeing our culture, because that's what we are. I'm an Age of Sigmar player. You're an Age of Sigmar player, probably, if you're watching this. It's nice seeing our gaming culture get more healthy and better on the tabletop. So let's keep that going, because we've doubled the number of people playing from last year to this year, and we've also improved our culture significantly. It's only a win, right? So I know that's a bit of like a preach, but I actually think I think that's really healthy. Right, let's go talk about the lists. So the event was called Renegades of the Realms. We had 24 players playing, and our winner was Peter Twig of the Yorkshire Fisters. So here you can see a picture of him picking up his big prize. What a superstar. Congratulations to him. Currently the most successful player in the whole of this GHB. Best corn player in the world as of today. So what's in his list? That's a great question. He's got the anti-magic dog walk, corn drops, and he's got 6 drops, 0 wizards, and proud. His sub-faction is the Reapers of Vengeance, and he's got a warlord battalion giving him prayer enhancements and a battle regiment for everything else. He's got a Scarbrand, Scar Bloodwrath, a Bloodmaster, another Bloodmaster, and then and that's it. And then he's got a Bloodthirster and Fetid Fury, who's his general. with Firebrand and the Argath, the King of Blades, which is the 3-inch no ward aura. And also, our first time we get to see it, the Nullstone Adornment, the Pouch of Null Dust. What this does is, at the start of the enemy hero phase, you can say that you're going to throw the pocket full of glitter at your opponent, and then any doubles that they roll during their casting are 1 of 2 or 3, they will miscast. And then he had 5 units of Fleshhounds, which is why I think Scarbrand on the Dog Walk is the name of the list. And then he's got a unit of 3 Mighty Skull Crushers and a unit of 3 Blood Crushers. And then the Hexgorger Skulls Invocations. So don't forget, those are anti-magic. Now, Khorne has been talked about a lot, I think, for 2 different reasons currently in this GHB. Or in the lead up to this GHB. Not forgetting this is the first event that we've had for this GHB. This GHB has given a load of wizards more additional spellcasting ability. You've got mortal wound damage spells as well as great buff spells, but you're also more likely to cast more spells. And so I think Khorne has been one of those conversations people have been having, or the army has been something they've been having a conversation about, along with Null Myriad for Bone Reapers, specifically because of all of the anti-spell protection that they have. In Null Myriad, it's a 2+ spell ignore, and in Khorne, it's a 5+ spell ignore, and you get a blood tithe for each time you do it. So those are the armies that have been picked to be really good. In addition, they're just good armies anyway. So being able to play against what is seen to be the strength of the new meta, which would be spellcasting, and also being inherently anti-Seraphon, which also feels like that's a very strong army as well, feels like this is something people are talking about a lot. So Pete doing really well with this list is good because it lets us talk about Khorne more. What are we seeing in this list? Okay, well, Scarbrand just is the hammer unit in this army, does loads of damage, and then the other Bloodthirster makes wards not available, so when you charge Scarbrand and also the Bloodthirster in together, you have a no ward aura, and you have someone who's doing a ton of mortal wound damage, which I think is really good. He's obviously got his anti-magic pick, both in the Pouch of Null Dust and also the Hexgorger Skulls, so he's shutting down magic twice in 2 different ways, as well as having an army-wide 5+ spell ignore, and every time he does it, he gets a blood tithe, which is really good. So let's just talk about the actual games that he played. So he did play over the course of the weekend, and we stream those games on the T Sports network. So if we just take a moment to look at his... Oh, this is the wrong game. Just very quickly, sorry, chat. If we go and look at his 4th game, we were playing the Geomantic Pulse Battle Plan, and if you'd see, he's up against a Seraphon army. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you have Croak, and you have a Slann. Now, this is very much what you're going to see as a meta Croak list in the future. And again, this is Paul's list we're going to talk about in a minute. It does an incredible amount of mortal wounds. I think over breakfast this morning, we worked out that it can knock out roughly 50 mortal wounds in a hero phase if things go correctly. It actually can go higher. And there's a multiple number of reasons. But Croak himself is worth about 24 mortal wounds. The Slann has got Comet's Call, so that's an additional amount of mortal wounds. Then the Slann can take Blizzard, which is our spell that we get in this GHB, which is potentially up to 46 mortal wounds, but on average is 14, which is very, very high. The Realm Shaper is able to blow up terrain, which does more mortal wounds. And then finally, oh no, sorry, when you do Celestial Call summon points, you do even more mortal wounds in AoE. And then lastly, Paul very cleverly has been taking the Malevolent Maelstrom spell. He's been casting that into the mid-board, and then he's been letting units die, powering that up and doing even more AoE mortal wounds damage. So I think 50 is about... I think between 30 and 50 is roughly what one of these units is going to get if there's no spell ignores, and then it could get even higher. So the Seraphon army, incredible amount of output. So what you can see is Peter did in his first turn is he pushed his army forward, he used a pocket full of Null Dust, and he was like, look, I'm going to try and shut you down now, and then Paul wasn't able to do much damage. Then in Peter's second turn, because he won the priority, he just went all in with Scarbrand on the left-hand side. He charged into the enemy Seraphon castle. We'll just look at it here. There you can see him at the bottom, and killed the Starseer at the bottom of the board. And then if we just change this, you can see at the bottom right hand corner there he attacked. He tried to attack this skink screen. Now at Paul's turn, he just deleted everything. If we go and look at it in a minute, you'll see with all of the spell damage, Scarbrand didn't survive, the Bloodthirster didn't survive, and none of the Cornhounds survive. So he was not able to defeat him, even wearing a witch's pilgrim's hat, an anti-witch pilgrim's hat. So how did this game turn around? Well, the thing that we've been talking about, which was the anti-magic nature of Khorne, played in really well in the later turns. So what happened is Paul tried to do even more spells again, and this time Peter had used the Blood Tithe ability to change your spell ignore from a 5 to a 4. He then was ignoring a lot more spells and generating a ton of Blood Tithe. This eventually led to him being able to get 20 Blood Letters on the board, having already earlier on summoned a Skull Cannon, and then be able to take some more of the objectives, winning him the game by only a point. Pretty impressive, in my personal opinion. But it really goes to show that what happened, in my personal opinion, in that match was that the anti-magic nature of Khorne did work, but only just. Only just. Which is pretty interesting. Only just worked. He only was just able to shut down enough magic to generate. So maybe those dice rolls are built quite well. Maybe 9 times out of 10, Khorne is going to beat Seraphon. But in that situation, it was very close, which I think is really interesting. The final game that he had to play, and the one that I think is really interesting, maybe not from a meta conversation, but also maybe from it, is how Khorne did so well in this match. This was again against Seraphon, but this Seraphon army was much different. It was all Saurus and Crocs based, so it wasn't Starborn, and instead it was Coalesced. He was playing against Tavi. Here you can see the Seraphon force pushed into the bottom of the board, grabbed the screens. Then Skarbrand went on a world tour, moving from the bottom left to the bottom right. As you can see here, taking out a load of those units on the bottom right, and then kept going up further along the right hand side, grabbing all of those objectives and all of those units. But the key thing to look at is on the bottom left hand corner. This unit of Agrodons never got to engage in combat with any of the Khorne force other than these Blood Crushers, because they kept getting Murderlust move blocked. It was actually pretty sensational to watch, and Peter did a really good job of doing it. However, it's possibly too strong. Because if you're a combat army, if you're going to play competitive Age of Sigmar this season, you need to be aware that if you're playing against Khorne, then you probably aren't going to be able to move several, at least one, but maybe several of your units in your turn, which is crazy. Like, the inability to move your own army in your turn, and the fact that Khorne can shut you down in your own turn. And don't forget, this is going to be after you've chosen battle tactics. What happens is at the end of the hero phase, Khorne can spend 1 Blood Tithe point to move a unit d6 inches. And it's board wide, any unit can move. And so what he was using this unit of Blood Crushers at the bottom to do was to pin these units back, hold the unit back, and make it so that they couldn't engage in a fight at any point in the game. This allowed Skarbrand and the Bloodthirster to go on their world tour and blow everything up, which is just absolutely crazy. Really, really interesting. Really interesting match. And he did great. Shout out to Peter for doing so well. So Khorne as a army in the new GHB are going to be very interesting, because while their anti-magic is definitely very strong, it is swingy. It's going to require dice rolls, which is really, really interesting as well. But into combat armies, it feels like it's very, very good, because it's got the ability to stop their hammer units from actually hitting your valuable units. And we'll talk about that more as well as kind of like a review, because there's actually even more to say about that. So if you're running magic and you're facing Khorne, prepare to think about that. But if you're running like the Seraphon bomb, I think you'll probably be fine half of the time. But if you're playing combat, I would actually say that you are worse. Like, Khorne is probably going to shut you down more than you think, and you should be conscious of that. So yeah, Khorne really interested in this meta. Well done to Peter for proving it and doing a great job. So that was our first place, and that was Khorne. In the 4-1 spot, we have Dom, who also won Best Sports. So 4-1 and Best Sports, only losing to Seraphon. So he was playing Gloomspite Gitz, he was playing Bad Snatchers. He had a Madcap Shaman with Moonface Mommet. He had another Madcap Shaman with Merciless Blizzard, and we're going to talk about that a lot in a minute. And then a Dankhold Trogboss. He had 20 Moonclan Stabbers, 6 Rotguts, 3 Rotguts, 3 Fellwater Troggoths, and 2 units of 5 Boingrot Bounders, the Gobblepalooza, and then a Dankhold Troggoth with the Andorian Acolytes and the Troghord Heavies. So one of the things he was trying to do here was get more of the Primal dice, #Primal, to generate a lot of spell casting. There's something to be said about how this army has been affected already massively by the Battle Scroll update. And again, we're going to go look at one of these games so you can see here. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see his game against the wonderful Rob Hull. There's Rob at the top there with his Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon and his Soulblight Gravelord's army. But if you look at the bottom, this unit of 6 Rot Guts are screening a unit of 3 Fellwater Troggoths. Now, normal coherency, or coherency as it was last week, you would never have been able to do this because you wouldn't be able to push those Rot Guts out as much. But the new coherency meant that those Rot Gut Troggoths could screen their Fellwater Troggoths, and there's a really fun interaction there. Because then if you were to charge the Rot Guts, which are a very survivable front line, he could then use the Puke standard shoot attack from the Fellwater Troggoths and reduce the armor save of the units that are fighting the Troggoths. It didn't end up working super well initially, but that's something really worth talking about, and how that coherency is going to change the shape of the meta again in Age of Sigmar. Again, and an additional point, I think, as well, it's worth pointing out that we're going to see this in loads of different units. For instance, if we talk about Khorne's a good example, you're going to see a strung out line of 6 Blood Crushers pinning in units in a crazy line. Like, there's so much board coverage with that unit. Another good example is Varangard. Varangard are going to now be able to fight just in a line of 6, so they're going to be able to take up more board presence as well, which I think is going to be really good for them. So that was just worth talking about, because actually that's going to be, you're going to see some interesting new shapes, maybe even some interesting new kind of like front lines for units in the game, which we previously didn't see. So actually that's pretty telling, and I think that's absolutely worth talking about. Other than that, actually talking about the list and what it just does a lot of damage. The Rot Gut Troggoths are very survivable, effectively a 3-up save because they're under the moon, and a 5-up ward save. The Fellwater Troggoths help reduce the armor save of the enemy unit, doing damage themselves, and then you just absolutely beat people up with the Rot Guts, right? The Madcap Shaman do a bunch of spells. Moonface Bomber also reducing armor saves again. Dankhold Trogboss is just a really good battle tactic and a good fighter in itself. The thing that was really worth talking, the 5 Boingrot Bounders are still, even with the points increase, one of the best kind of like small cavalry units, because they're on a very small base, but they've got very good output for their very low points cost and small profile. They'll go places your opponent wasn't really expecting you to be able to go. They're good for grabbing objectives. They're fast. They're mobile. Really good unit as well. But the thing I want to talk about is Merciless Blizzard, because I'm going to change my mind a little bit based on how I was feeling about the GHB last week. Merciless Blizzard is a spell that's cast on a 12. It's got a range of 12 inches. You can't modify that range. But if you do cast that spell, you can do 4d6 mortal wounds, an average of 14 mortal wounds to a unit within 12 inches. And this is actually going to be massive in this edition. Bigger than I thought it was going to be, mainly because of just how many primal dice you're going to generate. In Dom's list, as an example, he was generating quite a lot of primal dice because, as well as rolling it for the beginning, he also took the battalion that lets you generate additional primal dice. What's also happening he has got a very low investment in what he's trying to achieve, and your rate of return is going to be massive. So his Madcap Shaman is only 70 points. And again, if we go back and look at the match, you can see here he's got this aggressive front line. Rob doesn't really have any option other than charging this army. When he does charge this army, or wherever he charges this army, there'll be a wizard that's able to do 4d6 mortal wounds. That's almost enough to immediately kill the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. That Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon has all of the resources of the army pumped into it. It's got the command trait, it's got the artifact, it's one of the hammer pieces of the army. And the trading in this game has changed. Yeah, that is Warhammer Rob. Shout out to him. The trading in this game has changed. I would make a kind of bold, rough statement right now, based on this weekend, that any units that go over 300 points, 400 points, that don't have loads of wounds, so your monstrous heroes are a good example, Vampire and Zombie Dragon is a good example, are much worse than they were before this GHB. The idea of throwing a Maw Crusher forward and charging into a line is pretty scary when a single 65 point, 70 point, 90 point, 100 point wizard could immediately just take him off the board in the hero phase. Over the course of 2 hero phases, definitely take him off. Especially if you're you have no problem suffering a primal miscast with that model because you're just looking to just yeet a unit off the board. So I would say that, like, that's going to be, and lots of people this weekend were trying it. Maybe over the course of the next few months, it won't turn out to be the smart play, because, like, maybe Hoarfrost eventually ends up being smarter. Maybe people don't really plan on using it much. But I think you're going to be really surprised what happens when just a lunatic just casts a ton. Thanks so much. Just casts a ton of mortal wound damage at you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. This in addition, thank you, Declan, to the fact that Be'lakor got cheaper in this edition. So Be'lakor got cheaper, so you should see Be'lakor more. But the mortal wound damage that you're getting out of these models is going to really suppress, or should, I think, in theory, suppress some of these larger meta units that you might see. Like, there are loads and loads of units that don't want to take 46 mortal wounds. But when you've got, like, a large wound sink, let's say something like 20 Saurus Guard, 14 mortal wounds will kill 7 out of the 20. So it's kind of okay. But on Keeper of Secrets, on Lucavi, on a Bloodthirster, I mean, they have a ward save, so that's slightly better. A Stonehorn got a ward save as well, so slightly better. And it's not super hard to cast when you cast primals. If you get 2 primal dice, you should be able to cast it. Okay? That's the important part. Now, of course, your opponent's going to get primal dice as well, but they might want to stop one of the other spells. Who knows? It's interesting. I think a lot of players were doing their 46 mortal wound spell last. And they were like, I'm going to do this and do that. And then people were like, I want to shut down that spell. I don't want to shut that down. To be fair, Pedro, who was there this weekend, by the way, Pete, don't really enjoy 46 mortal wounds, to be fair, either. I don't think anyone does. And I'm actually surprised how many people took it, and I'm surprised how many people tried to use it. So my big takeaway as well is I think a lot of large miniatures have got their effectiveness reduced in this GHB, which I think is interesting as well. And the fact that you can't shoot those units outside of 12 inches, the game is in a crazy interesting place and very dynamic as well. We also saw this weekend a lot of teleports. Another good example that Dom was doing, because he has an army that can do a teleport. He was hero phase teleporting, and then he was just trying to blow that wizard up. Crazy stuff. So really worth talking about. And thanks, Dom, for showcasing both Blizzard and also coherency rules and how they've massively changed the shape of Age of Sigmar. So it's been really, really interesting. The next one was Paul Bowden. Shout out to Paul. He was great. Just lovely fella. He was playing Seraphon this weekend. He was playing Starborn. He was playing Fangs of Sotek. So the new GHB was in effect. New battle point, points, new FAQs and everything. He took Lord Croak, Asaurus Ashroth Bannerbearer. So Lord Croak casts 4 spells. And then an Ashroth Bannerbearer who adds plus 6 inches to the range of spells, and also it gives +1 to cast and a 6-up Ward Aura. Aslan Starmaster is 275 points that casts 3 spells, one more than Lord of Change, and has a command trait Lord of Celestial Resonance, which for each successful cast, unbind, or dispel this unit makes, you gain 2 CP instead of 1. That will be on every single Slan in every single Starborn list until they FAQ it. It is incredible return on investment. That means that Slan generates 6 Celestial Core points if it casts all of its spells. In this battle pack, if you go second, because you get an extra cast, if you go second in the turn, and he's an Andorian Locust, you'll get an additional cast on the Slan. That means he's worth 8 Celestial Core points himself for casting spells. If he unbinds 3 spells, he's worth an additional 6. That takes him up to 14 Celestial Core points. Just that 275 point wizard is insane. The value on that is unbelievable. Unchecked levels of insanity. That's important. The artifact is a Space Folder Stave, which the first unit to be set up at the end of the movement can be deployed 7 inches away instead. Just means when he uses his heroic action to teleport a unit, he can get closer. Skink Starseer, which is really good, which is a skink unit can move in the hero phase, and also he can give a ward save out as well. 2 units of Saurus Guard. These seemed clutch in all of his games. They are ablative wounds for all of the heroes. Each unit is a unit of 5, and they're 2 wounds each. That's 10 wounds, so 20 wounds for holding onto... basically 20 wounds on Croak, 20 wounds on the Astrolith Bonebearer, any of those things. Then a unit of Raptidon Chargers, and a unit of Skinks, and then a Bastillon with the Ark of Sotek, some Haunters of Honchi with Dart Pipes. So these are our the Chameleon Skinks. They're the new Chameleon Skinks. I got confused by those the other day. Thank you very much to 123 Cubus joining Patreon. That's awesome of you. While I'm recording, that's great. And then you had the Geminids of Ulgish and the Malevolent Maelstrom. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury at home, he was doing the most horrible things with these 2 models that I think anyone has ever done. So should we talk about what exactly is happening? Yeah. Oh, thanks, Pete. Loads of love. Geminids means that you cannot use any command abilities or receive command abilities until the start of the next hero phase. You will still be able to do rally because this is the start. This ends at the start of the hero phase. It ends at the start of the next hero phase, and what you can do is you can just let that ability happen and then do rally. Or that ability to dissipate and then do rally. Okay, so Geminids. And Geminids won him the game against Dom with all of his Trogs, because none of those Trogs were able to use Inspiring Presence. They've got pretty low bravery, so they weren't able to do all-out defense or anything like that, and so they suffered pretty massively, and then all ran away. So Geminids is great. It's a cheaper version of Horrorghast, stops so much stuff. Can't believe it's 50 points. I'm going to do an entire show on the Endless Spells at some point, because they're super worth talking about. Then he was using the Malevolent Maelstrom. This Endless Spell is also crazy for 30 points. It basically ticks up a counter, and when it's dispelled or it gets to the top of the counter, it does a number of mortal wounds at that range. And ladies and gentlemen, Seraphon have a spell that lets you dispel an Endless Spell in it. It's a 12-inch aura mortal wound bomb, and Seraphon can also engage with that, which is crazy. Now, I did talk about this already, but this is a magical gunline castle that will do somewhere between 20 and 70 mortal wounds in the hero phase. I don't think that's even outrageous. 20 and 60 mortal wounds, with your average being more around like 30 if it happens, which is insane. And then for the privilege of doing that, what's going to happen is you're going to also be able to summon or add more mortal wounds into your mortal wound output. What we saw in quite a few games was Paul was under the gun, lots of his Saurus Guard were dying, and he was using his Celestial Call points to bring them back and return models, because for your summoning points you can do a bunch of different abilities. One of them is to do AoE mortal wounds, one of them is to do a heal, and then some of them of summoning. So very effective. And that's it. Other than his game against Khorne, which is the only game he lost, and lost by a single point, this army deleted armies. It took Trogs out in like 2 turns, so all of the Trog Gloomspike Gits. We saw it play against Archeon and Incarnate, and also Be'lakor, and then it just tabled that army very aggressively, which was very good. But just very, very good. So it just does a ton of mortal wound output, and I just don't know what to say. If you don't have the ability to shut down the magic phase, I think this is one of the best lists in the game. This will delete huge armies, huge volumes of armies. This will delete so much stuff. And I don't know if there's a way to beat it. Just, I guess, throw loads of Stonehorns at it and roll for turn 2. And this was post-nerf. Yeah, this was post-nerf. But I think it was worth it in the end. Yeah, laughs in Null Myriad. Yeah, but not everyone is going to be playing Null Myriad, I think is the trick. And sure, there is a singular build that definitely beats it, which would be OC Bone Reapers and Null Myriad. Everything else is super tough. So shout out to Paul for showcasing what is an insane army. Like, the output for this is crazy. Like, it's just, yeah, that and also it does AoE mortal wound damage. So then, with the inclusion of Geminids, so that you can't use you can't use Inspiring Presence to ignore Battle Shock, each unit is then running away. So then they're all running away as well. Bananas. Paul, you've lit the world on fire. I love it. Absolutely great. And anyone who says that Seraphon aren't good is just bonkers. Which leads me into my next list really nicely. So I appreciate that. And the next list, and our last 4-1, was played by the Kennedy himself, Tavi Gain. I think I've said that right. I was saying Tavi. I apologise. I think it's Tavi. And then he was running Seraphon, Kotal's Claw. So this is the other version of the Seraphon book, which is great to see. He had Saurus Old Blood on Carnosaur with the command trait Vengeful Defender and the artifact Sotek's Gaze. A Skink Starseer with Hoarfrost again. That's different to what we've seen previously. So Blizzard, so this is our other version of that. So this is going to be changing the characteristic on some units. 20 Saurus Warriors, 6 Agrodon Lancers, 6 Croxagore, and 2 Bastiladons with Solar Engine, all in a battle reg. Now this army is very, very tough to kill. Everything other than the Skink Starseer is -1 damage to a minimum of 1, which came in very clutch. These 20 Saurus Warriors are 40 wounds that can get up to... they can have loads of save. At one point in the game, they had +3 to their save because they get +1 when they're contesting an objective. They start on a 4-up base save, I think. It might be a 3-up base save. Then they can also get a ward save from the Skink Starseer. Very tough to deal with. And they fight really, really, really well. Yeah, it's a 4+ armor save. Especially when you put Hoarfrost on them. At one point, this unit had +3 to its save, 5-up ward, and it was Ren 2, thanks to the Hoarfrost spell, which changes the characteristic from the Starseer. Saurus Old Blood on Carnosaur is a pretty cheap general and character. The Agrodon Lancers became battle line in this list because the Old Blood on Carnosaur was the general, and then the 6 Croxagore. And then the Bastiladon at the Solar Engines at the back, doing loads of shooting with their guns. Now, what was fun to see about this list is this list looked really legit. There was lots of output from the list in the Agrodon Lancers and the Saurus Warriors, the Old Blood as well to a degree. That was backed up by the Solar Engines, being able to also shoot and also bring lots of damage in as well. But it was the defensiveness of this army that was so impressive. They would tank huge volumes of damage and attacks, lose almost none, and be able to start fighting back, which is very impressive. So based on this weekend, I would say that Kotal's Claw Seraphon are very good. And if anyone is thinking about running Seraphon in the new GHB and wants to use these Kotal's Claw, wants to use Saurus, then I absolutely would do it. So yeah, really good. Really, really good. So those are my takeaways from this weekend. And I think there's even more to go through as well with this new GHB from this event, and I'm going to try and get a bunch of interviews with a bunch of players from this week because I still think there's lots. But I think my big takeaways are that Blizzard, so the 46 Mortal Wound spell, is going to be more effective in games and is going to have suppressed some units being good more than I would have given it credit for before this weekend. I think that's my first big takeaway. I think my other big takeaway is coherency is going to change up the shape of the game in a way that we haven't seen used exactly right yet. I think those new shapes and new army builds are going to work around the fact that you can build slightly different armies as you progress up into the midboard, which I think will be interesting as well. So I think that's going to be really fun to see happen. I would also say that I think Murderlust feels insanely strong now. This isn't the first time I've seen it, and it's not by no means new. We saw it play at Worlds, and it'd be really good. But I think even post-nerf, I think it probably could do with not being moved into combat, I would say. Other than that, I think the big takeaway from this weekend, and probably the big takeaway, that's the big takeaways from the GHB. Oh, probably should talk about the battle plans. The last 2 battle plans we played were easily 2 of my favourite. We played Geomantic Pulse, which I had massive feedback at being a really good battle plan, especially good on day 2 when you really want to separate out the high skill players. I think that's a battle plan that could do a massive deep dive on. There's loads of information about how to play that battle plan really, really well. We also played Limited Resources, the last battle plan, which we did a stream on the other day, and not many people clearly watched that stream because they ran out of objectives to hold very early into the middle of the game, which was really fun. And again, doing a battle plan show would be really fun to do, so we're going to do that as well. So I would say my last takeaway from the GHB specifically is that it's incredibly exciting. Loads of great battle plans, loads of great games, loads of interesting stuff, thrilling. So I would say that, and the whole thing is going to be wild, really fun. Then moving on to the players and the culture, I talked about that earlier, but I was just incredibly impressed. And I'm really excited to see how the Age of Sigmar community develops over the next years more, because it's getting towards like really impressive, and that's kind of what we want as a community, because it's even friendlier for new players to walk into, because the tournament players are so friendly to be around, which is good. And a special shout out to Dom, because this is like his ninth best sports award. At this point, what we're going to do is probably produce a Dom award, which Dom wins, obviously, like just immediately for being Dom. If Dom turns up, he gets the award for being Dom, best Dom. And then we'll just, whoever second place best sports is, will get the second best place. Like, I'd like to see him and Jacob Berry try to be best sports. Who would win? Don't know. That would be really fun. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit of a ramble. It was kind of like half a stat center, and it was half a review from my event of the weekend, and also half my thoughts about like the new GHB. But all of those things hopefully coalesced in something that made a lot of sense. Coalesced, nice joke about Seraphon there. But yeah, just really great stuff, I would say. So, and it's just an exciting time to be in Age of Sigmar. I just want to play more. I was late to stream this morning because I was just talking more Age of Sigmar, having been talking Age of Sigmar all weekend, and I'm going to talk more this week. So it's great. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you to the Twitch chat for being part of the show. Loads of love to you. If you like the show, please do help support the show by joining Patreon. And yeah, have a great day.